What happens when one of Britain's most beloved comedic actors walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a lighthearted chat, only to be met with hostility, dismissive remarks, and a relentless attack on his career? In just 33 seconds of one comment, the atmosphere shifted from awkward to explosive, resulting in one of the most shocking walkouts in daytime television history. This is the story of how Rowan Atkinson, the genius behind Mr. Bean and Blackadder, found himself in a battle he never signed up for on Loose Women, and how host Denise Welch turned what should have been a friendly interview into a full-blown confrontation that ended with security being called. It started like any other episode. The Loose Women panel that day consisted of Denise Welch, Kay Adams, Nadia Sawalha, and Jane Moore. They were discussing comedy, physical humor, and the changing landscape of entertainment when they introduced their special guest. Please welcome to the show, the legendary Rowan Atkinson. Denise announced, her smile wide but her eyes carrying something else entirely. Rowan walked out to applause from the studio audience, dressed in a simple dark suit, his characteristic gentle demeanor on full display. He waved politely, took his seat, and the interview began. "So Rowan, thank you for joining us," Kay Adams started warmly. "We were just talking about physical comedy, and obviously you are the master of it. What draws you to that style of performance?" Rowan leaned forward slightly, his voice measured and thoughtful. "Well, I think physical comedy is universal. It transcends language barriers. When I created Mr. Bean, the idea was that anyone, anywhere in the world, could watch and understand the humor without needing translation." The audience murmured in appreciation. Nadia Sawalha nodded enthusiastically. "That's absolutely brilliant. My children grew up watching Mr. Bean and they still quote moments from it." "That's very kind," Rowan replied with a modest smile. But then Denise Welch leaned forward, and the temperature in the studio seemed to drop. "Though some might say that kind of comedy is a bit, simple, isn't it?" Denise said, her tone sharp. "I mean, pulling faces and falling over, it's hardly intellectual, is it?" The other panelists shifted uncomfortably. Jane Moore glanced at Denise with surprise. The audience went quiet. Rowan maintained his composure, though his expression tightened slightly. "I think that's a rather reductive way of looking at it. Physical comedy requires an enormous amount of skill, timing, and precision. It's actually quite complex. But you're not exactly known for witty dialogue or clever wordplay, are you?" Denise pressed, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "It's more about pratfalls and silly voices." Kay Adams jumped in quickly, trying to redirect. "Well, actually, Denise, Rowan's work on Blackadder is renowned for its brilliant writing and delivery. The scripts are considered some of the sharpest in British comedy." "Thank you, Kay," Rowan said quietly. "Yes, I'm quite proud of that work." Denise waved her hand dismissively. Yes, Blackadder. But let's be honest, that was decades ago. What have you done lately that's actually relevant?" A collective gasp rippled through the studio audience. Nadia Sawalha's mouth fell open. Jane Moore looked directly at Denise with clear disapproval. "Denise, that's incredibly rude," Jane said firmly. "Rowan is a guest on our show." But Denise ignored her colleague. She kept her gaze fixed on Rowan, her expression challenging. "I'm just asking what people are thinking. Your last film was 5 years ago? And it wasn't exactly a critical darling, was it?" Rowan's jaw clenched. His hands, which had been resting calmly on his lap, now gripped the armrest of his chair. "I choose my projects carefully. I don't feel the need to constantly churn out content for the sake of relevancy. Or maybe the offers just aren't coming in anymore." Denise shot back with a laugh. "Maybe the industry has moved on from your brand of humor." The studio fell into a stunned silence. Even the cameramen looked uncomfortable. Kay Adams reached over and touched Denise's arm. "Denise, come on, this isn't." "What?" Denise snapped at Kay. "I'm just being honest. Why do we have to pretend that everything is wonderful all the time? This is what we do on this show. We speak our minds." Nadia Sawalha shook her head. There's speaking your mind, and then there's being unnecessarily harsh to a guest. Rowan came here in good faith. Rowan sat very still, his eyes now fixed on Denise with an intensity that seemed to unsettle her, though she tried not to show it. "If you had an issue with me being here," Rowan said, his voice low and controlled, "perhaps you should have declined to have me on the show. But to invite me as a guest and then attack me on air is not just unprofessional, it's cruel." Denise laughed, but it sounded forced. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. I thought comedians were supposed to be able to take a joke." "A joke?" Rowan's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his careful composure. "You're not joking, Denise. You're being deliberately antagonistic. There's a difference." Jane Moore nodded vigorously. "He's absolutely right. Denise, you've crossed a line here." "I haven't crossed anything," Denise retorted, her voice getting louder. "I'm asking legitimate questions. If he can't handle a bit of scrutiny, maybe he shouldn't be in the public eye." "Scrutiny is one thing," Rowan replied, his voice now steady but edged with steel. "This is something else entirely. You invited me here under the pretense of a friendly chat about my work, and instead you've used it as an opportunity to belittle me." The audience began to murmur, some people nodding in agreement with Rowan. Denise noticed this, and her expression hardened. "Oh, so now I'm the villain?" Denise said, throwing her hands up theatrically. "Because I dared to ask you real questions instead of fawning all over you?" "Real questions," Rowan repeated, his eyebrows raised. "You called my work simple. You suggested I'm no longer relevant. You dismissed decades of my career. Those aren't questions, Denise. That's an attack." Kay Adams tried once more to intervene. "Let's all just take a breath and—" "No," Denise cut her off. "I'm not going to apologize for having an opinion. If Rowan Atkinson can't handle criticism, that's his problem, not mine." Nadia Sawalha stood up from her chair, clearly agitated. "This isn't criticism, Denise. This is you being hostile for no reason. And frankly, it's embarrassing. For you, not for him." Denise's face flushed red. "How dare you? I've been on this show for years. I don't need you telling me how to conduct an interview." "Then maybe you should remember how to treat a guest with basic respect," Jane Moore added, her voice firm. Rowan watched the panelists argue among themselves for a moment, then stood up from his chair. The movement caught everyone's attention, and the studio went silent again. "I think," Rowan said quietly, removing his microphone pack, "that I've had quite enough of this." Denise's eyes widened. "You're leaving? We're in the middle of the show." "Yes, I'm leaving," Rowan confirmed, his voice calm but resolute. "Because I don't have to sit here and be insulted. I came here as a favor, to talk about my work and my experiences, and I've been met with nothing but disdain from you." He looked at the other panelists. "Kay, Nadia, Jane, thank you for trying to keep things civil. I appreciate it." The three women nodded, their expressions sympathetic. Kay looked like she might cry. Denise stood up as well, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You can't just walk off. We have cameras rolling. We have an audience." "And I have dignity," Rowan replied simply. "Something you seem to have forgotten exists." The audience erupted into applause, many people standing up. Denise looked around, shocked by the response. "This is ridiculous." Denise shouted over the applause. "He's being oversensitive." "I didn't say anything that bad." Rowan paused at the edge of the set, turning back one final time. "You know what the saddest part is? You genuinely don't see anything wrong with your behavior. You think being cruel is the same as being honest. But it's not. Honesty can be delivered with kindness. What you did today was just mean-spirited." "Oh, get over yourself." Denise spat back, her composure completely shattered now. "You're acting like I committed some terrible crime. I asked you a few tough questions. That's my job." "Your job is to interview guests, not to berate them," Rowan countered. "There's a reason your colleagues tried to stop you. They could see what you couldn't, or wouldn't." Jane Moore stood up and walked over to Rowan. I'm so sorry about this. You absolutely don't deserve this treatment. Nadia joined her. None of us wanted this to happen, please. Know that. Rowan gave them both a small, sad smile. I know, thank you. By now, a producer had rushed onto the set, looking panicked. He tried to whisper something to Rowan, presumably asking him to stay, but Rowan shook his head. I'm leaving, Rowan said firmly, and I think you'll find that most reasonable people will understand why. Denise, watching her interview fall apart, made one last desperate attempt. Fine, go, run away. Just proves you can't handle real conversation. Kay Adams finally snapped. Denise, stop it. Just stop. You've done enough damage. I haven't done anything, Denise protested, but her voice lacked conviction now. She could see the audience staring at her, many with expressions of disapproval. Rowan started walking toward the exit, his head held high. The audience's applause grew louder, some people even cheering him on. Good. For you, someone shouted from the audience. We love you, Rowan, another voice called out. Denise stood frozen on the set, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She looked at her fellow panelists, but found no support there. Kay wouldn't meet her eyes. Nadia was shaking her head. Jane was still watching Rowan leave with an expression of deep regret. Unbelievable, Denise muttered, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. Absolutely unbelievable. But it was clear she was the only one who felt that way. The rest of the panel, the audience, and likely everyone watching, at home, could see exactly what had happened. A beloved actor had been invited onto a show, attacked without provocation, and then blamed for being upset about it. As Rowan reached the studio door, he paused one more time. Without turning around, he spoke one final sentence, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent studio. I've spent my entire career trying to make people laugh, to bring joy into their lives, but I won't sacrifice my self-respect to do it. Not for this show, not for any show. And with that, he walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded thunderous in the quiet studio. For a long moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The cameras kept rolling, capturing the aftermath of what would become one of the most talked about moments in Loose Women history. Finally, the producer stepped forward and called for a commercial break. The red light on the cameras went dark. Kay Adams was the first to speak, turning to Denise with an expression of disbelief. What were you thinking? I was doing my job, Denise insisted, but her voice wavered. I was asking questions. You were attacking him, Jane Moore said, flatly. From the moment he sat down, you were hostile. Why? Denise opened her mouth to respond, but seemed to struggle to find the words. I mean, you humiliated him, Nadia said quietly. And you humiliated us by association. We work hard to create a welcoming environment on this show, and you destroyed that in minutes. In the audience, people were still murmuring, some getting up to leave early. A few were on their phones, no doubt already sharing what they had witnessed. Back on set, Denise sat back down heavily in her chair, reality beginning to dawn on her. It wasn't supposed to go like that, she said, more to herself than anyone else. The red light came back on. They were live again. Kay Adams turned to face the camera. Welcome back. As you can see, Rowan Atkinson has left the show. What you witnessed was a disagreement that escalated beyond what any of us anticipated. The camera cut to Denise, who shifted uncomfortably. I want to say that I never intended for things to become so heated. But Denise, Nadia interjected, there's a difference between challenging questions and disrespectful comments. Rowan came here as our guest. The tension was palpable even through the television screen. Jane Moore nodded. I think it's important that we acknowledge that what happened here was not okay. Denise's face reddened. I think everyone is being overdramatic about this. Are we? Kay asked, pointedly. A respected actor just walked off our show. That should tell you something. The camera panned to the audience, many of whom were nodding in agreement. Some still looked shocked by what they had witnessed. maybe we should take some calls." The producer's voice came through their bad earpieces, desperately trying to salvage what was left of the show, but it was too late. The damage was done. What was supposed to be a lighthearted interview with one of Britain's most beloved comedic talents had turned into a masterclass in how not to treat a guest. As the show continued, attempting to move on to other topics, the energy never recovered. The panel members were visibly uncomfortable. The audience remained subdued, and somewhere outside the studio, Rowan Atkinson was removing his guest badge and walking to his car. His dignity intact, even if the interview had been a disaster. In those final moments on set, as they wrapped up the show, Denise Welch sat quietly in her chair, no longer attempting to defend her actions. The reality of what had happened, of how it would be perceived by viewers, was clearly setting in. Kay Adams delivered the closing remarks with none of her usual warmth. "Thank you for watching today's show. It was certainly memorable." The cameras cut, the red lights went dark, and the studio fell into an uneasy silence once more. The crew began packing up equipment, many exchanging glances and whispered conversations about what they had just witnessed. On set, the four panelists remained seated for a moment, none of them quite sure what to say. Finally, Nadia stood up, removed her microphone, and addressed Denise directly. "I hope you realize what you've done here today. That man is a legend, and you treated him like he was nothing." Denise looked up at her but didn't respond. What could she say? The evidence was all there, captured on camera, witnessed by hundreds in the audience and thousands watching at home. Jane Moore stood as well, her expression one of deep disappointment. "I've been on this show for a long time, and I've never been more embarrassed to be part of this panel than I am right now." With that, she walked off the set, followed closely by Nadia. Kay Adams stood last, pausing to look at Denise one more time. "You owe him an apology," Kay said simply. "Not that it will fix what happened, but it's the least you can do." Then she too was gone, leaving Denise alone on the empty set, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been a pleasant afternoon chat show, but had instead become something else entirely. A crew member approached to retrieve her microphone pack, and Denise stood mechanically, allowing them to unhook it. She walked off the set slowly, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Meanwhile, in the green room area, members of the production team were dealing with the aftermath. Phone calls were being made, damage control was being planned, and everyone who had been involved in booking Rowan Atkinson for the show was likely rethinking their career choices. The security guard at the main entrance watched as Rowan Atkinson's car pulled away from the studio. He shook his head, having heard through his radio what had transpired inside. "Shame," he muttered to himself. "Really seemed like a nice bloke." And that was perhaps the saddest part of the entire debacle. Rowan Atkinson had arrived at the studio that morning as a nice bloke, a talented performer ready to share stories and insights about his craft. He had left as a nice bloke who had been subjected to unprovoked hostility on live television and had made the difficult decision to walk away rather than endure more disrespect. Back in the studio, as the last of the audience members filed out, many were still talking about what they had seen. The consensus was clear. Rowan Atkinson had done nothing wrong. He had been patient, he had tried to answer questions respectfully, and when the attacks had continued, he had made the dignified choice to remove himself from the situation. One audience member, an elderly woman who had been a fan of Rowan's work for decades, stopped to speak with a producer on her way out. "That was disgraceful," she said firmly. "Absolutely disgraceful. That poor man came here to be interviewed, not to be insulted. You should be ashamed." The producer could only nod, knowing she was right. There was no defending what had happened. No way to spin it into something acceptable. Denise Welch had crossed a line, and everyone knew it. As the studio emptied and the lights were switched off, the empty set stood as a silent testament to one of the most uncomfortable moments in daytime television history. A moment that started with a simple introduction and ended with a walkout that would be talked about for years to come. The chair where Rowan Atkinson had sat remained pushed back from the table, exactly where he had left it when he stood up to leave. It seemed fitting somehow, a physical representation of the space between what the interview should have been and what it became. In the end, what happened on that Loose Women set was simple. It was a clash between someone who believed in treating people with respect and someone who mistook rudeness for honesty, hostility for authenticity. And when those two approaches collided, there was only ever going to be one outcome. Rowan Atkinson, the man who had made millions laugh over decades of brilliant performances, had been pushed too far, and rather than sacrifice his dignity for the sake of a television show, he chose to walk away. It was a decision that resonated with everyone watching. A reminder that fame and success don't mean you have to tolerate mistreatment. That being a guest on a show doesn't mean surrendering your right to respect, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply remove yourself from a toxic situation. The show would go on, of course. There would be other episodes, other guests, other interviews. But that particular moment, that confrontation between Denise Welch and Rowan Atkinson, would be remembered long after everything else was forgotten. Because it wasn't just about a bad interview or an awkward television moment. It was about dignity, respect, and the courage to stand up for yourself even when cameras are rolling and an audience is watching. It was about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it, regardless of the setting or the circumstances. And, in that sense, while the interview itself was a disaster, Rowan Atkinson's handling of it was a masterclass in grace under pressure, in knowing when enough is enough, and in maintaining your integrity even in the most difficult situations. The empty studio, the silent set, the vacant chair, all stood as reminders of what happens when respect is absent and hostility takes its place. When a guest becomes a target and an interview becomes an attack. When entertainment crosses the line into cruelty, it was a lesson learned the hard way. Broadcast live for all to see, captured forever on camera as a cautionary tale of how quickly things can go wrong when basic human decency is forgotten in pursuit of what exactly? Ratings? Drama? The satisfaction of tearing someone down? Whatever Denise Welch's motivations had been, the cost was clear. A ruined interview, a damaged reputation, and the memory of having driven one of Britain's most beloved performers off her show through sheer hostility. As the last person left the building that evening and the doors were locked behind them, the story was far from over. It had only just begun. The audience who had been there would tell their friends and family. The footage would be discussed, dissected, shared, and through it all, one truth would remain constant. Looking back at the interview, the warning signs had been there from the start. The way Denise had introduced him, the edge in her voice, the slight tension in her smile. It should have been clear this wouldn't be the friendly chat everyone expected. The audience had erupted in applause at Rowan's defense of comedy, drowning out whatever Denise had been about to say next. She had waited, her lips pressed thin, her fingers drumming impatiently on the table, until the applause died down. "That's very noble," she had said, sarcasm thick in her voice. "But let's be real. How many actors look at your career and think, I could do that? Fall downstairs, make funny noises, cash the checks?" "Denise," Kay had said sharply, "that's completely out of line. Why is it out of line to have an honest conversation?" Denise had shot back at her colleague. "Are we supposed to pretend everything is wonderful all the time? There's a difference between honest conversation and being needlessly cruel," Rowan had said, his voice quiet but intense enough that everyone fell silent. "You keep saying you're being honest, but what you're actually being is dismissive and disrespectful. You've made it clear you think my work is beneath you, that my choices are wrong. But I don't recall asking for your approval." Several audience members had begun whispering, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Denise had leaned back, crossing her arms. "I'm sorry if you can't handle a little criticism." "This isn't criticism," Rowan had replied steadily. "Criticism discusses the merits and flaws of a performance or project. What you're doing is attacking my entire body of work. My choices, my career, and by extension, me as a person. That's not criticism. That's hostility." Jane Moore had nodded vigorously. "Exactly. Rowan, you don't deserve this. None of our guests deserve this. I think I can decide how to conduct my own interviews." Denise had snapped at Jane. "I don't need you or anyone else telling me how to do my job." "Then maybe you should consider whether you're actually doing your job," Nadia had said, her warm demeanor replaced by genuine anger. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're attacking a guest for no reason other than your own ego." And that was when things truly exploded. Denise had stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly. "My ego? This has nothing to do with ego. I'm trying to have a real conversation instead of this fake, sugar-coated nonsense we usually do." "There's nothing fake about treating people with basic decency," Rowan had said, standing now too. "There's nothing sugar-coated about respect. What you're doing right now isn't real or authentic. It's just mean." They stood facing each other across the table, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of the confrontation that would soon become infamous. "If you can't handle the heat," Denise had said, her voice low and threatening, "then maybe you shouldn't have agreed to come on the show." "I agreed to come on a setter talk show," Rowan had replied, matching her tone. "Not to be your verbal punching bag. There's a significant difference." And that was the moment when everything shifted from uncomfortable to impossible. When Rowan started removing his microphone and Denise realized, too late, that she had pushed too far. When the other panelists stood up, trying to salvage something from the wreckage, and the audience began to applaud Rowan's decision to leave, the security guard who had been standing by the exit stepped forward, uncertain whether he was supposed to stop Rowan or help him leave. Rowan gave him a small nod, a silent communication that said he was leaving of his own accord, no intervention needed. As Rowan walked past the audience toward the exit, several people reached out to touch his arm in support, to offer words of encouragement. He acknowledged each one with a gracious nod or smile, even in the midst of his own anger and hurt. One woman, tears in her eyes, said, "You've brought so much happiness to my family. Thank you." Rowan paused, placed his hand over hers briefly, and replied, "That means more to me than you know." It was a moment of genuine, human connection in the midst of chaos, a reminder of why he did what he did, why he had dedicated his life to making people laugh. Behind him on the set, the argument between the panelists continued. Denise defended herself, insisting she had done nothing wrong, while her colleagues made it clear they disagreed. The producer frantically tried to figure out how to proceed, whether to cut to commercial, whether to address what was happening. But Rowan didn't look back. He kept walking, his head high, his pace steady, until he reached the door and stepped through it, leaving behind one of the most dramatic moments in the show's history. Rowan Atkinson had walked into that studio with his dignity intact, and despite everything that happened, despite the attacks and the insults and the hostility, he walked out with it still intact. Not everyone could say the same.